Hmm. What's the relationship between regions and availability zones, right? What is the relationship? All right, better question. Do regions fit inside of availability zones, or do AZ's availability zones fit inside regions? Good. Amazon's best practices, you use how many availability zones in a region? Good, at least 2. Just know that if you need higher like resiliency, then you're going to need to use more availability zones. I just to say this though, most people don't use more than 3 because not every region has 4, right? But typically 2 is good enough. But just remember that you also have to have capacity, or at least the ability to scale. If one of those regions goes down, you need to be able to scale up the other ends. By the way, auto scaling, which looks like a single device, runs across all availability zones inside of a region. So you don't have to worry about losing your load balancer if auto scaling fails. You also don't have to worry about losing your internet gateway. You also don't have to worry. In other words, with the exception of virtual machines, and I would say NAC gateways are the only other device, you don't have to worry about like losing access to the internet, or losing access to load balancing, or losing access to S3 if an availability zone goes down, right? It does vary by service, but for the most part, the services are all super highly available. It's really things like a NAT gateway or virtual machines that are single AZ only. Okay. All right, so then that's AWS's core infrastructure. What about globally? Well, AWS has these things. I mean, that's the technical term for it. Things. Hey, look at that. I must have done that recently. There we go. Let's do this one. All right, so this is from 2019. So AWS, by the way, is now at their 300th plus point of presence for CloudFront. Here's what it looks like. So think of this is that notice that there's only a few regions listed here, but see all those blue and like purple dots? This is where Amazon, and I actually had an installer for this from AWS in one of my classes a couple weeks ago. This is where they have installed either a server or a rack of servers at a major ISP. So just to be clear, this is a genius move on their part, because what they've done is they stuck a DNS, a caching server, like they've stuck a bunch of servers at these major aggregation points for the internet. What this means for you is that if you want to run caching across the entire world across AWS's global infrastructure, they have stuck servers that act as caching points near every entry point where people can get large-scale internet access. So almost every major city that has a huge internet presence, they've stuck a server there to support basically lowering latency, to support better performance. So notice that, with the exception of kind of like, Russia, which I'm sure there's good reasons for that. I don't really have any idea what it is. In Africa, where they're still working on getting access to stable infrastructure, they've got points of presence scattered all over the world. Now, this is basically from 2019. There's probably newer versions of this, let's say 2021, just to give 2022 a little bit of a breather. Let's see. That probably has more updated maps. Amazon used to publish this and then they stopped, and I'm not exactly sure why, and I haven't gotten an answer to my questions. But this is probably also a pretty accurate map, right? Oh, this is actually from the, okay, so this is actually really good, because this is actually from the CloudFront documentation. So see this? Just some slight changes, but notice the density is increased greatly, right? Especially in like major population centers. Although we're still pretty light in China, we probably could fix that. So just know that these edge locations, also known as points of presence, are basically where they have like offered additional kind of global services, but you don't run your applications and you don't run your data here. This is for caching purposes. So certain services will allow you, for example, to take your coffee shop and bring a copy of the coffee shop closer to your end users, but it's a fake coffee shop. It's almost like it's like a coffee truck, right? It offers some services, but it doesn't offer all the services that your coffee shop offers, right? A good practical example of this is that, let's say that you're hosting videos down in Brazil and a customer in Russia wants to get access to that video. What you can do is you can turn on what's called CloudFront. And CloudFront, when that user tries to get all the way to Brazil, the first thing it will do is it will actually talk to the closest edge server. This all happens through DNS, by the way, automatically. It's really cool. The customer goes to the server, and the server goes over AWS's high-speed backbone and gets all the way to Brazil, pulls a copy of the video, pulls it over to the edge location, and then starts streaming it out to the user. So then the second, third, fourth, and fifth users, so any users past that who try to access that video in Russia, will now go to that edge location, and the edge location doesn't have to go back to the source. Now let's be clear. You can control this. This is a basic content delivery network concept. Akamai, Fastly, all this, they all do the same thing. Difference is that CloudFront is super integrated in with AWS, and CloudFront will not charge you any data charges if you use their CDN versus using somebody else's CDN, right? So John, this is exactly the same concept as a CDN in Azure. Feature-wise, I don't know if they're comparable. Azure could have more, AWS could have more, I have no idea, but it's the same concept. Okay. So this is known as an edge cache using an edge location. CloudFront is the service that makes this happen. Okay, so in terms of like physical locations, here's what I want you to put into your brains. Amazon has huge data centers called regions that are made up of availability zones. The availability zones are actually where the data centers live. There's usually 3 data availability zones per region. Sometimes there's more. Outside of the regions, which are located all over the world, and by the way, there's like just slightly, I think there's like 31 regions in the world. Outside of those major data center investments, Amazon has scattered servers all over the world at major ISPs. Those are called edge locations or points of presence. That's where things like CloudFront and Route 53 and other services like that run. Their job is mainly caching. Sometimes they can run some authentication and some app stuff at the end, at the edge. Now, what if you're like, that's cool, Michael, but I still have a data center and I would actually like to run AWS's hardware in my data center? Well, this is akin to taking a coffee shop and running it inside of a Kroger, or, you know, you're a factory, for example. So Outpost is the service that does this. And so what this does is that you schedule an Outpost delivery. Amazon works with you to set up some footprint, like power, cooling, space, that kind of thing. Then they come and install a rack of servers inside your data center, and then they hook it up to AWS. This means you can now run applications through the public interface inside your data center using AWS's hardware. Now, obviously, you can't touch or mess with that hardware other than the networking, but it's there inside your data center. So that way you can get a lot of control over the environment. And by the way, you can even disconnect it from AWS if you want to. It's really, I'll tell you though, that this is really not designed for environments with limited to no connectivity. If you want to run stuff with limited to no connectivity, you want to look at like an edge device, like the snow cone. I know the words that come out of my mouth. Did he just say snow cone? Yes. AWS snow cone is edge IoT device that is used for mildly disconnected environments. Okay, so Outposts. You want to run AWS's hardware? You can. Okay. When choosing AWS region for your services, data, and apps, why should you consider proximity to your customers? What does being close to your customers get you? Why is that important? Perfect. Delaney just answered that right off the bat. Yeah. Someone give me another word for latency. What would a customer say? What does that get the customer as far as their experience? What does low latency do for them? If something's really fast, right? It gives them basically a great customer experience, right? Because the speed, it's fast, right? I mean, I'm sure you all know, but if a web page takes 3 seconds to load and you were born after 1981, your chances of abandoning that web page skyrocket tremendously. Why? Yeah, because we want fast response, we want fast interaction. And that's, you know, that's nothing to like to slam the generation. That's not meant to criticize the generation. We're all like that now, right? If it loads up to 3 seconds, you know, it's like, I don't know about this. Do these guys really know what they're doing? Now, of course, sometimes we blame the service and sometimes it's the internet. So let's be clear about that, right? But we definitely need faster response, faster interaction. So quick review. Regions are comprised of availability zones. There are typically 3 availability zones in every region. Outside of these data centers, these regions, there are edge locations, including an edge location, by the way, that's inside the region. So there's always one inside the region as well. And so they're usually scattered wherever there's a major ISP so that they can act as caching locations. Edge locations are not necessarily data centers. They're usually somebody else's data center that Amazon has actually stuck a set of servers in. Okay. So Jacob, you said, does adding availability zones add costs? So you automatically have access to almost every AZ in the world the minute you open an account. So there's no charge for access. But if you run 2 web servers and one's in one AZ and one's in another, you're going to pay for both web servers. So that's the main thing, is that it's when you run resources, like having to duplicate across 2 availability zones, that's where you're going to incur costs. But honestly, that's no different than what you would do in your own data center. So that's not, you know, you want to run 2 virtual machines, somebody's getting billed for something, right? So that's where the costs get added, is that you have to duplicate your infrastructure. By the way, if you're using managed services run at a regional level. So often you get multi-AZ duplication and you don't really pay for that. So just know that Amazon frequently pushes people to use managed services because you get instant regional high availability, but you're running one instance of the service. So it's really just virtual machines and the associated services for virtual machines that have to run in multiple availability zones. Okay, what about interacting with AWS services? How do we do that? Well, there's, you can order a cup of coffee, ask for a refill, check your rewards balance. And so Amazon has multiple ways. So the first is obviously the management console, which we've actually already seen, right? This is the one that I was just messing with, and I think I converted it over to the new console, and now I kind of regret that because I'm like, hey, can I go back to the old one? Just because it had a full list of stuff, but maybe I can add a widget. Hey, there's no widgets here yet. All I've got is favorites. Anyway, this is the console. This is where things you can tell, like your account number, you're logged in, right? If you want to get into things quickly, this is where you can tell what region of the world you're in. Notice that I have Canada and Europe and blah, blah. Notice that China and some other regions are not listed here. You have to request access to those. Notice I don't have GovCloud. You have to request access to those. Obviously, you can do things like see if there's like event logs and notifications. This basically takes you to the AWS Cloud Shell, which is a browser-based shell. It basically has a bunch of tools already installed in it. And then this, by the way, the reason they do this is so that, like, if you want to run the command line, which is the second way that you can access AWS, what they're doing right now is they're actually creating a Docker container that has all the tools already like inside of it and ready to go. And so it's actually provisioning it right now for us to use. But if I didn't want to wait, I already have this on my system. We can use the command line to do things like so this, by the way, will tell me who I'm logged in as. My son calls me Spartan Sage, so I use that for a lot of my demo accounts. If I wanted to get all of the EC2 instances, sorry, it took a second for me to remember. Describe instances. I don't have any reservations in US East 1. Note that I'm using a command line called Starship. Starship Shell is what it's called. I run it on all my devices so I can have a unified interface that looks the same regardless of whether I'm using Linux or Windows or whatnot. Notice it's telling me that I'm in US East 2 already. So that's not common, by the way, for people to see that on the command line unless I've set it up. So that's the command line. Other ways that you could, oh, you know what, hold on. Bear with me just 1 second. Other things that you could do is that you could use, for example, CloudFormation. Let's see. Let me show you what this looks like. CloudFormation, by the way, is kind of one of the enablers that allows you to use this domain specific language to define AWS. Just know that that's one way you can use like an abstraction layer to code your AWS infrastructure. So in terms of like the 3 ways, as far as like command lines and software development kits, there's also lots of tools like Terraform, Pulumi. I've seen people use Crossplane before. The CDK, the Cloud Development Kit, can also be used. So there's a bunch of different ways to manage your AWS infrastructure. These are the 3 official ways from AWS, but AWS also owns CloudFormation, which is a proprietary way to do it, or the Cloud Development Kit, which is also a proprietary way. There are a bunch of third-party tools that allow you to manage AWS. Okay. Kind of interested in that Cloud Shell, see if it was up. Oh yeah, it is up. So AWS STS get caller identity. Let's see what that returns. Oh yeah, it says I'm still logged in as Spartan Sage, which is good. Let's run that same command we ran before. Let's get some EC2 instances. Yeah, no reservation. So it still thinks that I'm, it should list me as being in Ohio because that's where I'm at now. If I switch to another region that has EC2 instances in it, it'll show them. So if you ever need to get a quick Cloud Shell with the proper credentials and you don't want to set up all the tools and all that stuff, this is a great way to get it. Okay. By the way, this does keep your credentials off of your local box. Be mindful though, is that you want to add 2-factor authentication to other things into your login. If you're logging into the console, someone gets access to your AWS account, don't worry, AWS will work with you very strongly, especially if someone starts up like a bunch of Bitcoin miners or whatnot. But you want to treat this as very serious because people could ring up tens of thousands of dollars if it goes unchecked. But just so we're clear, that's almost impossible. AWS is constantly watching your account for malicious behavior. If all of a sudden you spin up a bunch of Bitcoin miners, AWS is going to email, call, and like text you if they have your number to let you know that your account, they think it's been compromised. So they will help you protect your account. They're really good at that. So don't be silly. Make sure you have 2-factor enabled. Oh, excuse me. I thought I was going to sneeze. Turned out to be a yawn. Okay, knowledge check. And it was a sneeze. Which of the following is true for AWS's global infrastructure? Let's read these out. Is it A, B, C, or D? Which of these is true? Good. Yeah. A region consists of 2 or more availability zones. I feel like we could argue 3 now. I didn't even realize that they now, every single one had 3. I guess they boosted it, so they wanted to make sure everybody had 3 availability zones. Good work on their part. So that's D, correct. All right, so which 2 factors out of this list should be considered when selecting a region? I just want to mention this. Service availability is not listed here, neither is cost. Good, yes. So compliance with data governance and proximity to customers. Those are all, like, those are 2 of the other 4 factors, right? Excellent. Okay. What statement best describes CloudFront? Someone was asking me a question in chat and we covered it, right? We said, yeah, it's this. It's just like this concept. And the answer is indeed D. It's a content delivery network, and it's a global one at that, which most of them are. Okay. Which of the physical Amazon locations does CloudFront operate out of? That's really the question. What does CloudFront use to actually do all of its caching? Right, it's an edge location. Now, don't get me wrong. There are caching locations inside of the event, like region, right? But it's really the edge locations that do the bulk of the caching. Okay. What actions can you perform if Amazon installs Outposts into your data centers? That's right. You can extend AWS's infrastructure and services into your on-premise data centers. That's C. Perfect. Good. That, my friends, was module 3. So we just talked about the 3 kind of like major locations, availability zones, regions, and edge locations where the AWS's global infrastructure exists. Talked about 4 things to think about if you're going to choose a region home for your applications and data. And we talked briefly about the 3 ways: the web console, the CLI, and the software development kits to interact with AWS. I just want to mention this is that Amazon has come out with this concept called local zones, which is like a 4th way that you can actually host applications. You're going to see this start to rise in popularity, but you might have noticed that when we were hovering over our locations, it listed the local zones there. Think of local zones as availability zones that are not inside the region. And that's a weird concept. But for example, let's go take a look at our AWS global map for a second. So notice how it says that there are 9 local zones associated with Northern Virginia. Here's what this means. Amazon, instead of just making a bunch of data centers in the United States, what they did is they've taken like smaller data centers and they put them in Boston. They put a data center in Miami. They put one in Atlanta, which they just announced like that last week, which is where I'm at. I'm in Atlanta. They put another one in Dallas. They put another one in Philadelphia. They're putting these like smaller data centers at all these major metropolitan areas so that people who need single millisecond latency, like single digit millisecond latency, they're actually allowed to host their applications in these non-redundant data centers. It's a weird thought, but local zones are just non-redundant availability zones. You're like, Michael, what does that mean? It means, for example, if I put an application in Boston and for some reason that local zone fails, I have to fall back to Virginia, which is going to be a different user experience. Not a bad one, just slightly slower, right? So just know the concept of local zones is where Amazon's taken an availability zone, pulled it outside of a region, and stuck it in a city. And they've got a lot of them right now, actually. Where are the local zones? Let's go. Oh, you know what? They're not listing that. Why isn't that link active? Anyway, let's go take a look at AWS local zones. So notice that right now, where are the locations? Oh, AWS, you can do better than this. Here it is. So Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, Dallas, I mean, there's a whole huge list here, right? But the local zones are basically places where you can run things like compute and serverless and whatnot, but they're not redundant. You can't run two and two AZs because this is a standalone availability zone. That's called a local zone. It means it's local to the city in question. Notice that the parent region is in a total another location. So Philadelphia, right, is not necessarily that far away, but it's not super close to Virginia, right? Certainly, if we look at like Dallas, for example, Dallas is not close to Virginia, but that's the fallback zone, right? So the parent region for this particular single data center, the fallback is Northern Virginia. So one thing that kind of cracks me up is I think Amazon dislikes California so much that they made the fallback for Los Angeles. They made it Oregon. And I say dislike, they probably don't dislike it. What they're doing though is I think they're going to retire US West 1 when they get a chance. So yeah. Wow, I wonder if that offended some New Yorkers. We're calling it New York City, but it's located in New Jersey. That's funny. I feel my friends from New York would have a field day with that. Hold on, I gotta snapshot this really quick because that just cracks me up. I know people who are gonna get really puffy about that. That's funny. Okay. Sorry, I just want to explain local zones really quick. Could be. Although I'll be frank, the Los Angeles one actually does run in Los Angeles, Brian. It just falls back to Oregon. So I don't, the New York one, they could be Texas. I have no idea. Good. All right, so that was module 3. And by the way, those are 2 of the largest modules in the class. So we've actually covered a good bulk of the course. We're going to talk about networking, and then we're going to stop and we're going to take lunch. Let me stop the share really quick so you can have your own discrete video.